close to the railroad tracks, and that railroad train whistle, she recognized that for some reason or other. If she heard that whistle, she started walking towards the railroad tracks, thinking she was going to go someplace, I suppose. I mean, she rode it clear from New York to Minnesota, and in those days it was a long ride. Another instance where she was going in the chicken coop, and her dad, Peter Shen, scolded her for doing that because I suppose she was scaring the chickens, and told her if she went in again, he was going to lock her in. Well, she did it. She didn't listen. She went in, and Grandpa locked her in, and then she broke windows from the inside. So she was known as, I guess, not mischievous, but she was kind of a, well, maybe you'd call it mischievous little child. But that's normal for a child, I'm sure.
Did she have brothers or sisters?
We don't know that. My daughter found another young lady, or found another name with the same last name that come out of the same orphanage 2 years prior to that. So we don't know if that would have been a sibling of hers or not. But as far as we know, no, she didn't.
How did the kids at school treat her?
Oh, I've never heard anything different. I mean, I've never heard anything derogatory about that. I know she was a good student. In fact, she went on to college and went on to become a school teacher. I think back in those days, you probably didn't even know she was an orphan. A lot of her friends didn't, because I think in the early days, being an orphan was something to be ashamed of. I think that's why a lot of the word didn't get out. Now it's a good thing now, but in those days the kids probably didn't even know she was an orphan.
Were there any other orphan trained kids that went to her school with her?
As far as we know, no. There was some children or some kids in the Breckenridge area, Wheaton, Minnesota, Herman, Minnesota. There was other children, but in her particular school, no, there wasn't any that we're aware of anyway.
What date did your mother celebrate her birthday?
I guess I really couldn't even tell you that. I think it was just celebrated probably on the 6th of April, because that was earlier than the 12th, and I wasn't aware of the difference until just I think after she passed away that I was made aware that they weren't sure of her exact birth date.
Were all the children put on the train, or were some of them held back at the home?
Well, they were. I mean, when the train had so many people, then the train would leave, and they'd arrange for another one. I'm just not sure how they operated that, from the eastern end of it. But I mean, many trains went out of there, and they went into the Carolinas, they went into Texas, Dakotas, Minnesota. I guess I couldn't answer that in all honesty, how they operated it from the other end. I know it was a good thing, and a lot of those kids were homeless kids, were taken off the street. My mother was fortunate to be in a home, but I guess in all honesty, I got to be proud of the fact that that she did have the home she did have, and I mean, things just seemed to gel for her from the day she was born on until the day of her death, really.
Did you have to be a certain age before getting on the train?
No, I don't think so. They had nuns that rode the train with them that were caregivers, so I'm sure there was no age limit. I mean, if somebody wanted an infant, then an infant was probably sent by the train, but someone was there to take care of them. I know my mother was, when she arrived in Tinta, she was very ill. She had head lice, and she was sick to the point where, I don't think she was, her life was in danger, but in those days, if you got real sick, it was a little difficult.
Did the adoptive parents know whether they would be getting a boy or a girl?
I think they requested a girl, and that's why my mother ended up with them, as I understand it anyway.
Do you know if all the kids found homes, and if not, would they be put back on the train to be taken to another town down the line?
I think that's what did happen. Yeah, the ones that weren't prearranged, and you've seen some movies on them. Little House on the Prairie has an episode where the orphan train stopped, and the kids were put on the stage and like a slave auction virtually, and they answered questions, and if the farmer thought that little guy would make a good farmhand, well, then they would choose him. And if they weren't chosen, I'm sure they were put on on the same train probably, and just went on to the next town. And I have no idea how many youngsters probably never were adopted. And I don't know if if a child was ill, maybe nobody wanted them if they were ill. So it's many different things. And keep in mind, back in those days, they didn't have the laws that they have today, so a lot of cases that the youngster wasn't protected by our government as they are today, to an adoption agency.
Were the kids on the train, did they have anything with them to bring?
Just the clothes on their back, and they had a name tag. They wore a name tag. They didn't, you couldn't give it to them because they'd lose it, so it was sewed right to their coat. A name tag that who they were, and if they were going to a certain place, that was on that name tag. If they weren't, they were just a name, and that's all. The fondling home had records, and they kept records. As a matter of fact, we've gotten records on my mother's, on her adoption in just recent years. Years ago, they wouldn't put those records out, but my sister now runs the website for the orphan train out of Pine City, Minnesota, and she's gotten so much information. She's been in touch with the fondling. In fact, at our 50th anniversary, there was a lady from the fondling home was present, and she did a beautiful job. She had information that anything that you wanted, if she didn't have it, she'd get it for you. That's the difference between now and back in 1914. I remember seeing a letter that my grandfather had written to the fondling after he adopted my mother, or after he and his wife adopted, and he sent them a check for $5 and a thank you note for allowing them to have that little girl. And $5 back in those days was worth a lot of money. We were able to get a copy of that letter that he wrote to them, which I thought was pretty nice, and it's in my file someplace. I have a copy of it. I'm not sure if it's with me, but it's a lot of information, and if you need to get information from the fondling, I can get you the website for them, or even a phone number for the gal that we've been working with. They're just more than happy to work with that, with people like you. They do that.
You said there was another institution or something also?
Let's see, I think New York Children's Aid Society. Okay. Is a little postcard that we had made up. Mm-hmm. New York Children's Aid Society was another orphanage other than the fondling